Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Crypto Leviathan podcast. I'm your host Dalibor. Here's my co-host Andrew. Welcome to the show. So just a little bit of updates on what services we're offering. So recently last week, I started getting involved in a group called the NFT Academy, and they essentially teach people the basics of crypto and blockchain and NFTs. So if any of you are interested in learning about this or getting involved, feel free to message me. I'll also include the link down below on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. So feel free to check it out. And now on to our news topic for the day. So we really thought this episode would be really valuable if we covered how a cryptocurrency was adopted or a pilot project happened in China. So during the Olympics this year, China actually issued all the Olympians there a card that was kind of like digital yuan, which they could use to spend to buy food, drinks, and shopping in China. So, Andrew, you want to share what you've learned about this?
Yeah, I think it'll be helpful to first analyze what this currency is and how it differs from traditional cryptocurrencies and also how it differs from the, I guess, the digital transactions that we normally have every day. So whether it be debit or credit card transactions, because they may seem similar and there may be some overlapping functionality, but the back end is very different. So to start off, it's called the digital yuan, or the digital, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, renminbi. And the card they give you, it's either a physical card or an app, which I believe is called the ECNY. Not really sure what that stands for. I'm assuming something along the lines of probably electronic Chinese national yuan or something like that, or Chinese yuan. Now, whether it be the app or the physical card, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dalibor, but it seems like it's a custodial wallet. So whether it be the app version or the card, it's just it's just your your exterior address, but I don't believe you'll get the seed at all. The seed is managed custodially by the Chinese government.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I was reading about that. That is a custodial wallet. So they basically manage it for you.
Right. And then so the way you fund your wallet can be either downloading the app and transferring it from your bank. I know for sure that in the videos I've seen, the demos, that is a way to do it. And alternatively, possibly you might be able to do it through credit card, but I haven't seen it. I haven't gone through this process myself. And the other way you can do it, and this is probably for less tech savvy individuals, they have ATMs or ATM-like machines where you put in cash, possibly other forms of payment as well, but I saw cash, and you go through the screen, the wizard, and they give you an actual card that comes out. So kind of like I guess it looks like a prepaid card or something like that, which is your physical wallet. So that's how you can get that card. They might be able to do it in branch as well at a bank, but I've seen the machine and I've seen the app, not in person, but through videos. So, and then when you go to a store, you just tell them that you're not paying with WeChat and you're not paying with a traditional card. You want to pay with ECNY, and it's as easy as that. Now, I guess the difference is that if you're using the app, it should be okay. You'll see your balance. But if you have the physical card, I guess to see your balance, you either need to then later download the app. But I would imagine these machines have the same functionality as kind of like an ATM, or if you put your card in, you might be able to see your balance. That's just an assumption, but I would think that's how it would work for less tech savvy individuals. So on the front end, it's a lot like a debit card or a credit card or something like that. I guess less so a credit card, unless it's a prepaid card, because credit card is debt, whereas a prepaid card and a debit card is money you have. So it's it's based off the blockchain. It's based off of blockchain technology, but the difference between the digital yuan and say Bitcoin is that it's completely controlled by the government, the Chinese government. They can control the amount of coins in circulation, and very likely they can see every transaction and grab data that way. I'm trying to think what other aspects of it are noteworthy. What do you think, Dalibor?
I think it's very noteworthy that I mentioned like during the Olympics, these Olympians like they were basically given this not cash because they wanted to run this pilot study. So I think it's incredibly valuable, right, to see what the Olympians actually thought about it. And I know I was reading some articles where some people, loved it because they didn't have to hold cash. They just had this card they could spend. Other people hated it because at previous Olympic events, they would just give out free stuff to these Olympians, but now they're forced to monitor their transactions through this card. So I don't know. It had mixed reviews though, from what I've recalled amongst the Olympians.
I think we should break down each individual area of concern. So from a privacy level, in China, I don't know if they still allow cash transactions. I know some countries have moved away from cash, such as I think Denmark. I watched a documentary on that, how like the majority of the population uses cashless transactions, whether it be through an app or debit card or credit card. And I do recall seeing a video saying that in China it's very rare for people to use cash. So if people aren't using cash in China and they're just using either traditional debit card or credit card or this Yuan, all of them have the opportunity for the government to track you. So I don't think that's a huge difference, but they'll be able to track you more efficiently, I think, with blockchain, because they won't have that extra layer of having to go through the banks that process the transactions. The transactions are processed in the blockchain, and all can be seen by the I guess the administrators, which would be the Chinese government. So what do you think about the privacy in comparison to more conventional digital transactions?
So I think depends on the Chinese implementation of it. If I was to say, I think this implementation is actually worse for privacy. This is a specific reason why. The government can circumvent the banks, especially we know the Chinese government's history with control, right? They like controlling their own population or having a tight control. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that it is how it is in China. And this allows them to directly, monitor what people are spending money on and how they're spending their money. So if the Chinese government decides, hey, I don't like how you're contributing to this funds, they can potentially block or force you to spend money on certain things, right? So let's say they don't want people investing in real estate or spending all their money in real estate. What the government could do is says these funds are not to be used for investment purposes. You can only use them to buy goods or whatever. So I just think it adds an additional layer of control. That's where I think my concern with privacy mostly is. And yeah, that's basically that would be my layer of concern.
So would you say that privacy is still a concern using the debit cards and the credit cards issued by Chinese banks, like the conventional cards, because they can still track you and still report that data to the government, but now it's just more efficient because the government doesn't have to go through an extra step, and perhaps the tracking technology built into the blockchain is probably more sophisticated.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that eliminating that middle person is very interesting, because imagine this, right? We all know banks are sloppy, they're slow. So for example, you could spend a ton of money before the government realizes, hey, you shouldn't be doing this, right? But under this system, they can potentially instantly stop you doing something that they don't want, right? You don't have that luxury of a lag. And this digital yuan kind of eliminates the need for banks in some cases, right? You don't need to keep a checkings account at a bank. You can be directly now on the blockchain. So I think it gives the government a lot more power, especially the central bank in China.
Yeah, so it's more efficient for them to track you. And in terms of their conventional banks, it cuts them out. And I think they would be then used as, I suppose, points of entry into the system. So you can go to a traditional bank to maybe sign up for a wallet, or for them to provide customer service or technical support. But
why would you even need that? Because the central bank could do all that.
I guess they could open up their own branches, but for the less tech savvy individuals, someone had to build those machines, the ATMs.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know who built them. I'm not sure what company. I'm just trying to think of in this new system where traditional banks fit in. I guess perhaps more on the convention, more on the like the loaning and the credit side and mortgages, they probably still have a role for now. But for checkings and savings, you can switch completely to the system and bypass their brick and mortar banks or even their online banks.
That does break banking though, Andrew, because what do banks do with checking and savings account? They loan the money to other people, right? So if people don't have deposits at banks, they can't loan, right, or give mortgages because they don't have the balance on their sheets. So I don't know. It's going to upend the system for sure. So I think the central bank's just going to do it all at that point.
Well, with that being said, I think a few of the large Chinese banks are owned by the government anyway, so it's a over there, it's a very different system than what we have here. Here, it could be very detrimental for these publicly traded banks, and perhaps that could be one of the reasons why in the West it'll take longer to implement because these banks, I imagine, would be very against a central bank digital currency.
I agree. So I think there's a couple of interesting articles that I read where this Olympian was trying to actually buy something using this digital card, and they didn't know how to use it at all. So someone from the Chinese government actually had to show them how to use it, how to transact, how do you look at your balance, how does it work. So I think it's very interesting. Like, we're relatively young, and then there's people our age who are still struggling to adopt this new technology. So I think that barrier to using crypto is still there, and it may take a whole generation to actually educate on how to use these products if they do become implemented.
I don't think there's anything inherently, unique to that system that makes it more difficult. I feel like there could have been just user interface issues, such as maybe lack of translation or just poor user interface. But if it's designed well, it should be pretty seamless and similar to just sending money on what do people use, like PayPal or Venmo. There's no reason why.
But Andrew, even those services people struggle with. You know how it is.
Yeah, I get it if you're like a 50 or 50 plus.
And Andrew, there's people our age who struggle with this. Don't want to get
right. I would think it'd be a lot less, right? Especially if you're an Olympian, you're likely under 30 or under 35.
I know people our age who struggle with this, who even don't do online banking. So I like.
Please don't share any names, but share a story with us.
Okay, happy that you started on this. So one of my good friends, I won't mention his name, but he essentially was trying to pay his bills and he didn't know how to do it online. He tried to log in, couldn't log in. He created like his online banking, but he didn't save the password. He didn't save the security questions. So he's like, you know what? I can't deal with this. So every time he gets a bill that comes in the mail, he doesn't even have e-billing registered because he says he never checks his email. His phone is like a flip phone. So he goes into the bank, brings all his bills, and he pays for them all. And the funny thing is, he actually owns another property. So all the checks and everything come from the landlords, come to him as a landlord. He also brings to the bank the cash. So it's a totally hilarious situation. And he is 28 years old, for context.
Is he Amish?
No. He just doesn't know how to use technology. He has a laptop at home. He doesn't touch it. He just watches TV because he says it's too complicated. So I would say they're not. That's an extreme example, of course, but there is a 20% of the population I would say could probably fit in that bracket where they're just not comfortable with technology.
So I think that's maybe a failure in the school system, because I know when I was in elementary school, around grade 5, that's when they started getting into computer usage pretty heavily. So we had computer lab courses where we did typing on a program called Mavis Beacon, which I think is still around today. But how most of my friends and I really learned how to type was just through instant messaging or like laptop or desktop based instant messaging. And they also had computers in class, so if we had to type up assignments and that kind of thing. So I think the school, it's for your friend, I feel that maybe his school dropped the ball on that one. And I didn't really have a computer at home until I was a little bit older, so I learned at school. But in terms of using technology, I think a big part of it is the UI, right? Because you've seen a lot of it's just forms and dashboards. And if stuff isn't intuitive and it's just, you know, not clear what they're asking of you, I can see how it's confusing. So I think you and I hate navigating dashboards.
Oh God, I do it all the time at work, and I deal with some pretty complicated dashboards, right? Like not what the average, front like user would use on a website. So yeah, it's a pain. Like dealing with UI, if it's not designed well, it's a mess. And I think another thing that I've realized also is people don't like change. So when you like update a UI and make it modern, a lot of people are like, oh, I don't like this, you know? So there's a lot of resistance to actually change, which I guess because me and you, Andrew, are heavily in the tech industry, for us it's just okay, whatever. But most people hate this stuff.
Well, I use a bank called Tangerine in Canada, and they switched their UI a couple years ago, and I almost closed my account because I didn't like the new UI. So I can definitely
Exactly.
relate. But let's
Exactly.
get let's get back on topic. So we covered privacy. I think there's always been a privacy concern with any kind of digital transaction that's run by banks or, in this case, the central banks. But now it's just easier for them to track you and easier for them to intervene if perhaps they wanted to stop you from making some kind of transaction or I guess in the case of people, you know, doing something illegal, it'll be easier for them to track and stop that as well. So that's privacy. What other areas? I guess ease of use. We're talking about that. So with ease of use, it really depends on the UI, how tech savvy someone is, and in this case, especially if it's foreigners, I don't know what the you know how much effort they put into making sure that everything's translated properly. I know that the machines that dispense the ECNY card have English prompts, like English audio prompts, but maybe not all the machines do. So hard to say. I did read in an article that the adoption was so-so, and but from a I guess a population perspective or a citizen perspective, it is slowly growing, and they're adding more and more cities to their network.
Awesome. Yeah, it's cool. At the same time, I do have concerns with it, but I would say, I would say there's two camps where you can be with this, right? It's cool that they're innovating and embracing this crypto technology that we're heavily involved and actually love, but at the same time, there's the authoritarian aspect to it, right? Or Big Brother watching over you when you spend money. Because right now, when you spend with your debit card or credit card, yeah, there's like a corporation tracking it. They may flag your account if you're doing fraudulent things, but the government doesn't directly know what you're spending money on, right? They don't track every single purchase. They only track major purchases right now. However, under this system, they could potentially track every purchase that every person in the country makes, use data mining on this and categorize, oh, people are spending money on this, we should raise taxes here, 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 and here. So it gives the government a lot more tools at their disposal. So it could be used for good, it could be used for bad, but I think as with any new technology, there's going to be both positive and negative impacts here.
Yep, I agree. And what do you think about adoption? Do you think it's going to take on in China? And do you think that other large economies will make their own, say, digital Canadian dollar or digital US dollar?
Well, they're already working on that in Canada. I know we had a bill just introduced, I think a few days ago, that actually said explicitly they're putting money towards exploring a digital Canadian dollar. So it's already happening. The question is how it will be implemented here, or will it be? I think most countries want a digital dollar or a digital currency. However, there's issues with it, right? Like you already talked with, the elderly here. We still have a population probably 50 plus that this will be impossible, to basically get them to use the system. So I think we're looking at maybe like a 10 to 20-year window where they're going to implement this and roll it out. So it's going to be kind of like in China where it's applied simultaneously to the current system.
So, what are the main blockers here? Non-tech savvy individuals, and what else would you say?
The technology itself, right? So China has a very centralized system and top-down control, so they can easily implement this. something in Canada, we have big banks, and in the US, there's tons of banks. How are you going to get banks on board with this? I think that will also take time. In China, they can just force you to do it, right? That's an area I would say. Another area I would say is certain countries in the world, they probably won't implement this because they don't have the money to do so. So imagine countries like in Latin America, like in Argentina and El Salvador. I just think they don't have the time or the resources to actually develop this technology like this. So they might just switch to something convenient like a Bitcoin or something.
So in Venezuela, I believe the national currency is the bolivar, and they're suffering from hyperinflation. Where I think the example I had read was in 2010, if you had the equivalent amount of bolivar to 1 million US dollars, making you a millionaire, if you had just held that same amount of bolivar until today, only 12 years later, it'd be worth less than $1 US. So you could have been the equivalent of a millionaire in the United States in 2010 if you had just kept it in your savings account to this day. To trade it for US dollars, you'd be getting $1 back. So that's how bad their hyperinflation is. And the reason I tell you this is that they have done a couple of things. They've issued a new version of the bolivar, cutting some zeros out, which is a standard practice in hyperinflation. They did it, I think, in was it the how do you pronounce it? The
Weimar Germany, yeah.
And they also did it in I think it was Zimbabwe. You just issue a new dollar, you cut the zeros. However, if you keep printing money, it's just gonna it does nothing. It solves nothing. But anyhow, they issued a digital bolivar, but I don't think the adoption is or I don't think it's widely used. I think the general public there don't trust the government. So whether it be a digital bolivar or a regular bolivar, they don't trust it because they're both susceptible to the same hyperinflation. So whether it be printing money or just adding more zeros, or adding more coins into circulation in the blockchain, it's the same people running the show. So I think the general public have switched to a non-government controlled cryptocurrency. I think it was called called Reserve or something like that. So I'm not sure if that was a locally developed one. I had only heard about it in that one article. I haven't looked further into it. But the government did create a digital currency, and the people do use digital currencies or cryptocurrencies in Venezuela.
Yeah, that's I think an important point you bring up too, though. Just because they've created digital cryptocurrency doesn't mean inflation doesn't happen still. The reason why they want to use a cryptocurrency is because you can't fake it, right? So counterfeit money basically becomes non-existent. That's, I think, one of the pros I forgot to mention is how do you counterfeit a blockchain coin? It doesn't happen, right? Because you would have to have more 51% of the entire hash, or the net, or I guess if it's a stake, you have to own 51% of all the currency, which is impossible.
So it did happen though. It happened to one of the Bitcoin forks.
Yeah. But I'm just picturing, imagine the US dollar on the system. It's impossible to own 51% of all the US dollars. It's impossible.
In a central bank digital currency, I don't think it could happen unless there's like a security flaw or an exploit. That's the only way.
Yeah, and I think the one problem with a centrally, like a central bank cryptocurrency is they have control over it too, right? So if they want to restrict your account, they could easily do it. It's like, no, you can't spend on this. We need to keep inflation down. Don't spend on these items. It gives them that leverage, and also doesn't solve inflation, right? They could still issue, more dollars at whim. So in that sense, it's basically taking the entire system we have right now and putting it in the blockchain. There's some pros, some cons, but it doesn't really change our monetary system, in my opinion.
So two things. In regards to inflation, I don't think there are that many cryptocurrencies that have a hard cap like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano. All these ones have
they're all inflationary in nature. Yeah. Right. Ethereum's interesting. They've kind of introduced some deflation mechanisms. As you trade, they burn like the fees for Ethereum, but I would say overall I still think it's an inflationary coin.
Okay. let's compare cryptocurrencies as we know them to central bank digital currencies, because we keep saying digital currencies, but really we've been using digital transactions for decades, right? Debit,
Yeah,
e-transfer, PayPal, these are all digital transactions. How does that differ from a central bank digital currency? Because on the front end, there's not a whole lot of difference really. As if you're if as long as it's coming from a checking account versus not so much for credit because that's debt, right? But from electronic transfers or transactions from a checking account versus a central bank digital currency wallet, how would you say it differs on the back end?
that's a very good point. Well, I think for example, right now at a bank, right, you have a checkings account, a savings account at the bank, and what the bank's doing with your money is loaning it to other people. So they maintain, let's say, a fractional reserve. I think right now is at 0% right now, Andrew. So they don't even need a fractional reserve right now. But regardless, so they're loaning your money out to other people, and the government uh, gives the bank, as the government creates more money, they also give it to the banks to loan out, or at the overnight rate, which I think in Canada is right now at 0.5%. So that's how the current system works, right? It goes through the banks. There's a bunch of lending going on. And as you deposit more money, your checking account, they lend. That's how you get a mortgage. That's how you get a credit card. Under this system, basically you'd have an account, which would be your wallet, at a central bank, or it could be at a bank that they're using as a custodial wallet, depending on how they implemented it. Now, on the back end here, your money is your money, technically, right? Can they loan it out to other people? Yeah, they could, but then it's not really cryptocurrency at that point. It's basically we have in banking. So what will probably happen is the custodians of that wallet will be lending money to other people. So let's say you have 10,000 in your account, you will have 10,000 on paper, but in reality, they'll be taking that money and loaning it to other people. So from a front end perspective, I would say you wouldn't see any changes. So if you were logging in, it would be the exact same. But from a back end, these accounts would say 10,000, but there'd probably be a liquid balance, which means like whatever the reserve is determined to be, could be 5%. That's actually currently in your account. So when you try to sell or you spend some of your money, what would happen is the bank says, oh, I have 5% of all the deposits currently in cash. So this account doesn't have that much. So what we're going to do is take from other accounts and put and transact with it here. So you would still be able to buy things, and as the user, you wouldn't see a difference. Now, where things do change, though, is when the government prints money. So what will they do now? They would just deposit it into the accounts of these banks, right? Because there's the lending mechanism is kind of flawed in this sense, because how are you going to lend money to someone when it's a hard asset, right? Like crypto. So I don't really see big changes, honestly. I just see them digitizing this.
But you can see how this is kind of confusing to
Yeah.
someone who isn't initiated into crypto.
Yeah, it's confusing. And even like if you don't understand the banking system as it is right now, it's confusing.
So this
I
is how
I I, I think we need to do a podcast to explain the whole banking system and why and the difference between crypto. I think that'd be valuable.
well, we can do that next week if we don't have a
Yeah.
guest. But this is how I see it. Let's compare four different systems: traditional banking, central bank digital currency banking, truly decentralized cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, and one that's controlled by a corporation, such as what would be a good example of that? Maybe Chia or
I would say a governance board. It doesn't need to be a corporation, just like a coin that has a team on managing it.
what's an example of that?
Ethereum.
Ethereum. Okay. So in the traditional banking system, I'm not going to go because I don't know how the central bank digital currencies plan to do mortgages, debt, loans, and that kind of thing. I guess we can kind of save that for another time. But just from a simple checking comparison, a comparison to a checking account, how transactions between me and you would work. So, say if I was to buy something from you, like say I was going to buy your, I don't know, your used PlayStation or something like that. In the traditional banking system, whether or not you and I are with the same bank, let's just say we're not. I'm with TD Bank and you're with RBC, or if you're in the States, Bank of America and Chase, right? I could use something like a email money transfer and withdraw cash. So if I go to the bank, I withdraw cash. Let's just use TD. So they have a database, and one of the records would show. Hello. Oh, so I thought I cut out for a sec. So my record, or my table would have a record that shows minus $100, and then my balance would be minus $100. And then say it was done electronically, then between the two banks, there's a connection between between the TD's database and Dalibor, your bank's database, and then yours would be plus 100. So that's one way. Alternatively, if I just withdrew it in cash, it would be the same thing, minus 100. And then when you actually deposit the cash, if you do, then be plus 100. So you're looking at two different databases, two different records, and that kind of thing. Now, with a central bank digital currency, you really have one database that is controlled by one institution, one organization, which is the Chinese government in this case. And so when I send something from my account to your account, it would be the same thing, but it would just be one database. Which that's correct, Dalibor?
Yeah, I do. Carry on.
Now, compare that to Bitcoin. That one database is then broken up into pieces and spread over the entire mining network. So you'd have, are they nodes in this case? You'd have people you'd have pools that would have the entire ledger, the entire database. And then you have people mining to that pool, which help process the transactions, but also to unlock further coins if they still exist. Yeah. So it's decentralized, it's distributed, and more secure, and no one really has control over it because of the centralized nature of it. So in the case of the traditional banking system, each bank has their database, and the central bank digital currency, the government has a database, and in Bitcoin, millions of people have the database, or hundreds of thousands, or however many. Now, it's very similar, I'd say, with Ethereum as well. Wouldn't you say it's very similar to Bitcoin? But the difference with Bitcoin and Ethereum is that Bitcoin is a hard cap. No one can really edit it. You could fork it, I guess, and you could fork Bitcoin and alter it that way. But the original Bitcoin that we know, you can't change some of the hard factors in there, such as how many coins, etc. And with Ethereum, it's very similar. Now, what about in the case of a staked coin such as Cardano?
So it's pretty similar, right? So you have nodes that are basically putting up their own crypto in order to validate transactions. So instead of having, like machines or computers running and mining to validate these transactions, you have nodes that are being set up, and people are pooling money as kind of like their stake in ensuring the network is valid. Because if they mess up, they lose that money that they've put up. So that's how that system differs. It isn't as decentralized as mining, simply because it benefits the people who have the most crypto. So for example, if I own 20% of the network, I will always own 20% of the network as long as I'm staking the whole time. So you can potentially never lose your initial investment. Basically, it doesn't matter how much more coins they have, as long as you're staking the whole time, it stays the same.
Okay. So going back to my comparison there, really in the back end, what we're looking at in differences is just how many different entities control copies of the database, or have versions of the database. So in the government central bank digital currency, all the controls are under one institution.
Yeah, whereas I would say that's the most centralized. And then what was your other option?
Traditional banking, where a handful of large chartered banks and like sub banks would then have their own databases. So it goes from one, where it's just the government, to a handful of banks. There are only so many banks, and opening up a bank is not an easy thing to do. And then you would have something like a proof of stake coin, where there's many players, much more than the central bank or traditional banking, but still less than the ultimate option, which is truly decentralized, where any one of us can just join the network by buying a graphics card or buying an ASIC.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, those are the levels. And I'm also going to make an argument here because I know a lot of people are fans of Bitcoin because they can't manipulate the currency. There actually is pros to actually having a fiat currency that people I think are overlooking because it's not like they switched for no reason. So in the 1970s, when they switched off the gold standard to fiat, um, it's actually easier to prevent hard recessions when you have a fiat currency. Because think about this, obviously, like a lot of people may disagree with this, but when you have a huge downturn like we had during the COVID pandemic, the government flooded the system with cash. What did it do? It prevented mass bankruptcies. It prevented, the housing market would have blown up in Canada if that happened. So they did save the system. People didn't go broke basically because of it. If we had, a Bitcoin type of system, people would have went broke 100%. It would have been the Great Depression. So it is a pro and a con, right? So you just have to pick what you want.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I do think you're right, but I wonder exactly how it would have played out. Because if you didn't have enough money in circulation and say a handful of people were hoarding Bitcoin in that situation, yeah, hard to say what would happen.
Well, it
But
has to collapse, Andrew, because lending stops. What's it called? People stops consuming. So what happens? The market just freeze and everything plummets because no one's buying anything, right? So it has happened before. That's how the Great Depression started, right? The capital just stopped being liquid. So there is pros and cons, like I said, to both systems. You just have to pick which one is preferable to you, because hoarding money under a gold standard or Bitcoin makes sense, right? It's never going to drop in value. But at the same time, many people may suffer under that type of system because they're unable to obtain the goods that they want.
makes sense. All right, so we've covered privacy, ease of use, and the difference between the different technologies. So I think there's definitely also advantages in a truly decentralized cryptocurrencies. But in terms of the central bank digital currencies and the traditional banking system, which is pretty much digital these days anyway, with a little bit of cash here and there, I guess the main difference there is just how many like fingers are in the pie. Is that a saying?
Yeah,
Or fingers in the pot or
yeah,
something?
fingers in the pot, I think, or something like that.
Right. So perhaps it's more efficient, but maybe you have less competition between some other innovations, because all the different banks compete in some other ways to, I don't know, presumably find innovative products for you. Although I don't really know how true that is because they're all so similar. So I don't think there's a huge difference between central bank digital currencies and the traditional banking system. It's just another app to download, because if you switch banks from, say, Bank of Montreal to TD, well, it takes a little bit of a learning curve as well, because they have different user interfaces. So just to switch to now, let's say, the Canadian government's central bank digital currency app, or the US or the Chinese, it's just another app, but it still operates like a checking account. They're now just, maybe the terminology is a little bit different and call it a wallet. And instead of sending money to an email address or a phone number, now you're sending it to some other kind of address. But I'm sure they could probably link it to an email as well. So I don't think the learning curve won't be huge. The learning curve will be big for someone who's going from cash to any kind of digital system, such as Bank of Montreal, TD, or some sort of central bank digital wallet. That's all, I think, very similar. I would group those almost all together, except for the privacy concerns and the government's control over it. But from an ease of use and adoption, I think it has the same barriers. It's very similar.
Agreed.
Now, go on.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, like, these digital currencies, I think another aspect of it is just people don't like new stuff, right? So like I've covered before, people who are already using this digital currency, most of them will transition over. They probably won't even notice a huge difference. However, there will be people, like you said, when Tangerine updated their UI, you threatened to close their account. So there will be those group of people as well who just got comfortable with whatever was the old system. They don't want to transition.
And in terms of China, I think if there's any holdouts right now, it's I don't think it's because well, I'm sure there are people in China who have concerns over privacy, I imagine, but you're so heavily under surveillance over there anyway. I believe that when you buy a new phone, you have to take a selfie to send to the government or something like that. So they always have an up-to-date photo. So there's all kinds of stuff like that that's already going on. So I don't think it can get really much worse. Like
Are you
you're under the
serious though? Do you
microscope.
have to take a photo when you buy a phone?
I this is what I saw in like one of those videos, like it might have been BBC. I think it was called BBC like tech something. I don't recall. They were
Wow,
talking about
that's really crazy. I didn't know that.
right. They're taking pictures. Sorry, they're talking about Shenzhen and a couple of the tech hubs in China and how the surveillance system there works. But I take everything I read or watch with a grain of salt because there's always some bias. I had heard this, and I don't know if it's true. There was a YouTuber who was saying that sometimes the BBC will show videos of China, and it's a naturally, like, say, a green scenic view, but they'll Photoshop the picture to make the trees and the sky look more gray, just to make it look like a more dreary place. Now, this guy could be lying as well because I haven't fact checked any of this, but I just take everything I read or watch with a grain of salt because there's always some kind of bias or you know sometimes an ulterior motive. But
Yeah,
I don't doubt that there's definitely a lot of surveillance going on there. Is it that extreme? I don't know, but more than here for sure.
I know. I remember watching the movie Karate Kid with Jaden Smith and Jackie Chan. You remember that one? You
I
remember
refuse to watch anything featuring anybody from that Smith family.
that one? All right. But regardless, that movie takes place in China, I think in Beijing exactly. I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, it looks like it's a pretty cool place to live in China. So that, like, when I hear stuff like this, I'm like, whoa, it's like a totally different perception from like that China that was portrayed in that movie. So that's all I wanted to say there.
Um, but yeah, so I guess back on topic. I think the main one of the barriers to adoption is if what I have already works. If I'm with, say, Bank of China and my app works, why switch to this new app? Essentially, don't we think of it as a new technology, just a new app? Because if I am with TD Bank, why would I switch to BMO if I'm already happy with TD? You could just think of the central bank as another bank.
What if they did something like this? This is what I was thinking. What if they just update their app or update their service and then people just don't see any difference? They can
Yeah,
just do that.
they might do that. And another way to switch over, I mean, there might be some logistical barriers. As you know, I think you and I have both done some work for banks before, and there's just sometimes it's easier to start from scratch versus changing whatever already exists. But
Don't get me started on banks.
yeah,
Their technology is antiquated to say the best.
so it might be easier just to try to incentivize people to switch to the central bank app. What they were doing a little bit in China, from what I read, was they were giving away free coins to people to kind of as like a promo or a demo. If you said to someone, "We'll give you, I don't know, $500 or $1,000 to switch over," I think you get a lot of people who would sign on. Like if the Canadian government offered me $1,000 to switch to the Canadian government banking app, which operated off blockchain, I'd do it for $1,000. Would you?
It depends.
Well, I sign up, I'd register, I take the $1,000. How often I'll use it afterwards is a different story.
I'd open up multiple accounts to take advantage of $1,000.
Yeah, I'm sure we all have like elderly relatives who wouldn't do it anyway, so just do it on their behalf.
Pocket that $1,000.
Well, I know that I read during COVID when the Canadian government was giving away CERB checks, there were people who would sign up homeless people and take a cut because these homeless people were either not aware of it or maybe don't know how. So the people who would do this would take a cut, and then the homeless people who probably weren't entitled to it, because I think the one of the criteria was that you had to have made $5,000 or more the year before. And I think it has to be from employment. I don't know if it counts if you got $5,000 from like other types of government benefits. So a lot of these homeless people, you can't go after them for repayment because they probably have no credit, no bank account, nothing. Or in this case, they might have a bank account. I don't know because I don't know if they were mailing out paper checks. But either way, you couldn't recollect this money from them, and a lot of them were overdosing because they got so much money so quickly that they're using it on drugs and alcohol and that kind of thing. But So definitely, something like that would be ripe for abuse. What was I going to say? So back to adoption time and the time frame that you put out there. You said 10 to 15 years. That's kind of extreme, don't you think?
I don't think so, actually, because people still haven't adopted, digital banking as it is right now. Getting them to switch over, it takes time, right? Think about with the electric cars, right? Same thing. Right? You have to build the infrastructure, you have to get people to buy in, you have to get companies to buy in. So this all takes time, right? Change doesn't happen in a day. You have to convince people, right? Because it's not like like China could just force this through. But here we still have a democracy and we need to actually, convince people that this is a good thing.
So do you think that in Canada and the United States, the existence of all these chartered banks, do you think that they will serve as an obstacle, that they'll be very against the adoption of this?
Potentially, depends the way it's implemented. Like it's too early to say because I don't know how they plan on implementing it. But once we have an idea of how they plan on implementing it, I do see resistance at the bank level. But I don't think it stops there. Any lenders will be at resistance depending on how it's implemented. So
So
if you have the entire financial industry trying to stall this, it's going to be kind of like the oil and gas industry lobbying against green energy.
so would you say then authoritarian, centrally planned governments in those countries will have, on average, much faster and higher adoption of this new central banking system compared to Western democracies or democracies in general?
Yeah, generally I would say so.
So how does this affect? How will this affect the U.S. dollar's dominance worldwide? And maybe you can go into a little bit about what the petrodollar is and why the U.S. dollar is dominant.
Uh, this is a bit of a loaded question, so I'll explain first how the current U.S. dollar functions and what is the petrodollar. So basically, right now, the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency. What does that mean? If you want to trade internationally with other countries, you have to transact in the U.S. dollars, and because of that, you have to trade with the United States basically to participate in this international community. And what Andrew's referring to by petrodollar is specifically to gasoline or oil. In order to sell oil, it's all priced in US dollars. And US dollars right now dominate. It's starting to wane a little bit because of the Russia thing. I'll get into that later. So essentially, if Germany wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, they have to transact in US dollars because it's all priced and all transacted. That's how the current financial system works. Right now, it is breaking actually because Russia is demanding oil be paid in rubles, which will cause problems if the US currency stops being the world reserve currency. However, if centrally planned countries adopt this, Andrew, I don't really see a big change here because this would be a political change where the US becomes less dominant. Until that happens, I don't see anything changing, to be totally honest. It will be up to the governments of the world whether or not they choose to continue using the US dollar.
So would you say that the one of the reasons why the US dollar is the global reserve currency is because of the historic link between the US dollar and oil? So because the largest oil producing countries had, I guess, some kind of agreement with the United States that the price of an oil, this caused worldwide adoption because it's such a heavily traded commodity.
It goes back to World War II, right? If you remember, the United States was the sole hegemon basically because all the other countries got destroyed, right, in World War II. So the US kind of could impose things on other countries because they basically didn't have an economy, a functioning economy. They need US money to rebuild. So part of the deal was, hey, we're going to adopt the US dollar in order to trade. So that's what ended up happening. So it stems from there. And also, they did have agreements with Middle Eastern countries in order to sell to the US or other countries, you have to use US dollars. That's how it basically became the petrodollar and established.
So I think that with possibly United States and Canada not getting into the central bank game for another 10 or 15 years or however long, and if China's able to roll this out in the next year or two and get other countries to jump on board and maybe get the citizens of that country jump on board and adopt it, that could really challenge the current global system.
I think, like I said, I still don't think that would change it because it doesn't inherently change our financial system. What China is doing, I don't think inherently changes anything. I think like again, it's going to come down to politics, right? Whether or not countries choose to, use the US dollar continuously, because there is a lot of pressure right now and not to use it. So that's where I think the breakage will come in, because it functionally it's the same thing, Andrew, right? You're still transacting. All the difference is we're changing it from a number in a computer to on the blockchain. That's it. That's all that would probably change. So I don't see how that will impact the US dollar.
Well, I think it won't impact us in Canada perhaps that much. Do you think it'll affect the US economy and the average US citizen?
If this is the sole variable we're using for this comparison, I don't think it will. If there's other geopolitical plays that happen, then yes, I could see it impacting.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll see. But I do think you're right that it could very well be several years, even though the technology is already here. They could implement it. They could do a pilot here in the States. I think there's just way too many decision makers, and not enough of like a central voice. And perhaps that's a good thing. But
It's a pro and a con with a democracy, right? So, like, let me give you an example. It might be good because we have discussion, get everyone's voice in, but let's try to build a house here in Canada. How complicated is that? So there's pros and cons to both systems, I would say.
right. Do you think this will affect? Let's just say, hypothetically, the digital yuan goes global and it's heavily adopted. A lot of the trade starts happening in that. Because I know I did read that there's a couple African countries that have adopted the regular yuan, not the blockchain version, as like I guess another national currency that's how should I say this? Like, I guess they had issues with their regular national currency, so a lot of transactions were happening in U.S. dollars. But now they made it so that transactions are easier among merchants in their own country in Africa with the yuan. So in a system where not everyone is eager to get U.S. dollars, would there be then an oversupply of U.S. dollars in the system globally?
There potentially could be, but there's also issues using the yuan, right? China is a heavy export-based economy. They don't have a strong internal market. It's growing, but it's not there yet. So unlike the US, it has a strong import market, right? They are basically the store of the world, right? Everyone wants their goods in the US. So until that happens, I can't see Chinese currency being valuable, because in order to become a reserve currency, people have to want to trade with you. Right now, China's just selling, right? So I still think it'll take some time for that fundamental shift. And the question is, will it ever happen in China? That's even a bigger question.
That makes sense. So in this system, the American population, they benefit from goods being made all over the world coming to the US, and those countries want to sell the goods to the US because they want those US dollars. So I guess one of the main US exports is their own dollar. Whereas
It is. Yeah.
in China, they probably manufacture enough for themselves and the world. So what do they really need to bring in? Just I don't know, a few, I guess, like some luxury items, and maybe some things that they just can't grow locally, but it's not on the same level as the US.
Yeah, and that is one of the reasons why I think adoption of the yuan is actually struggle, because China has to import. If Chinese exports stop, what's China? Their economies are going to collapse, right? The US is a little bit different, right? They're heavily import based, so it's an interesting dynamic, right? China needs the US as much as the US needs China. They act like adversaries, but they're basically joined together at the hip.
Yeah, there's a really good show I like. It's called Firefly. It takes place like 500 years in the future, and I guess a large group of colonists from Earth left for another star system, and the two, I guess, main leaders of this this colony effort were, I guess, either U.S. and Chinese citizens or U.S. and Chinese government, because I think you do see somewhere that you see both flags in some like cargo or something like that. And everyone speaks English, but all slang is in Mandarin. This was a show on Fox that was canceled after like 1 year. But yeah, it's interesting to see what will happen. But one of the things that China does import a lot of is Western media. So whether it be sports or Disney content.
But what's the monetary value on that? It's probably very low, right? Compared to imagine importing finished goods or finished products.
Yeah. So interesting. So I think we covered privacy, ease of use, time to adoption, the US dollar's dominance, its relation to the petrodollar, and then the differences between the different technologies on the back end. Because the front end, if done right, there shouldn't be a whole lot of, at least between central bank and traditional banking, there shouldn't be a whole lot of difference. But, compared to Bitcoin or Ethereum, those are a little bit different further that we've talked about in the past.
Yeah, I just imagine a scenario like this where China just creates a Skynet type of thing where they can just monitor and control people's money. That'd be very scary. They could totally do it, right? Because of the central bank would control everything. Just having an AI shut people's money down.
Well, they can, having AI do it, I guess that's different, but it happened in Canada. So there was people who, I guess were donating on GoFundMe or something like that. And that got them, they got their bank accounts frozen.
Yeah, but here there would be an AI doing it, right? Here
It'd be quicker.
Yeah, much quicker. And I would say potentially a lot more false flags and a lot more angry people.
Yeah.
All right. Anyways, Andrew, what are your thoughts on the next podcast? Any interesting topics you have in mind?
What did we say earlier that we're going to do? Talk about the banking system?
Yeah, I think comparing the banking system to current crypto, like an in-depth view, I think would be very helpful.
Yeah, we can touch on that a little bit.
We've both worked in banking, so we both understand how it works.
Yes. Yeah. And it's still, I don't see banks being able to adapt to this new system. I think, you're going to have either the bank just usurp them or perhaps some sort of other fintech company, take a big market share away from them.
No, Andrew, this is what's going to happen. They're just going to acquire a company that has a system implemented.
Oh, right. It could happen the other way around too, because I know that like BitTorrent, that was a pretty big company. They were they invented the what would you call that? I guess the BitTorrent network, like torrenting in general. They were bought by a crypto company.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Anyways, I think we'll leave it at there. So we'll talk about it at the next podcast. Stay tuned. See you guys next time.